Consciousness with Freeman Michaels and Barnett Bain. Thought-provoking discussions and bold ideas from the edge of possibility.
And welcome to Cutting Edge Consciousness. Freeman Michaels here with Sandi Stewart. Cutting Edge Consciousness is sponsored by Hierophant Publishing, Hampton Roads Publishing, and Insight Events USA, creators of books and products and events for the body, mind, and spirit, and we're grateful to them. Hey, Sandi.
Hi, Freeman. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How about you?
Good. Really good.
Yeah, we've both been sort of jet setting. I'm off to Mexico again. Another round of women in leadership.
Wonderful. Well, we're speaking to the right person today.
I know. Isn't this exciting?
Yes. Yeah,
I want to give a little background on what I've been doing. It's so interesting that this is how I've found myself gainfully employed.
This time around.
It's so crazy.
We have so many incarnations.
I know we do. In this lifetime,
exactly.
Right? So what happened is a little over a year ago, I got a telephone call because there's a dear friend of ours who I've trained with for a number of years who said, can we take a program we have and adapt it for women in leadership? Because we have a client who's interested. And the backstory, I think I'm just going to divulge. Sometimes I try to not say the name of the company, but I think it's such all good news that there's not going to be a problem here. So Citibank owns a number of banks in 23 countries, actually, in Latin America. And one of the big ones, of course, is in Mexico. It's called Banamex. And when they bought Banamex 12 years ago, more than half of the employees were women, but less than 3% of, they would call it director level, we'd probably call it manager level, right? Were women. Mm-hmm. And they want to do something about that. And they were very wise about this. They created an internal women's council, and they wanted to sort of promote from within. But even with their best sort of intentions, it wasn't sticking. And some of it was the women weren't taking on the opportunities. Mm-hmm. So they wanted a training. And so we offered to adjust one of our trainings that we do and make it women in leadership. Of course, I work with Susan Leahy as my training partner. And Marcia Martin, who actually came in and was with Gabrielle in the first round. Yeah. So that was the team we initially put together. And now we've got a few other people based on circumstances. But it's been a crazy, amazing ride. And I'm so in love with women in leadership. It's such a powerful thing to be part of.
Well, you're in the right place right now because we have like the quintessential women in leadership master with us today, Carolyn Buck Luce, a wonderful friend of mine. I've learned so much from her, and I continue to learn from her. Carolyn is the managing partner of Imagino Labs, and she is also an adjunct professor at Columbia University teaching women in power. She is focusing right now on healthcare, which is a really, really interesting conversation. Women and healthcare. She was appointed by Mayor Bloomberg as the commissioner of New York City's Commission on Women's Issues. Her resume goes on and on and on for pages. But the other interesting thing that she has been involved with is co-founding the Corporate Council for the White House Project, and she brought together major corporations to enhance the perception of women as business leaders in the public eye. Woo-hoo. And she's featured honoree as the first Corporate Leadership Award. But the thing that I love about her, and this is what she told me when I first met her, I don't know if I can say the word, but Carolyn's first assignment was in the Soviet Union in the days of spying. So let me just leave it at that. But she has a very diverse background. She is brilliant, and she is going to have so much to talk about with us today. Welcome, Carolyn.
Well, hello. Now I'm going to have to kill you, Sandi, now that you've...
Yes. Now I have to be dead.
The FBI is outside your house right now.
Yes, exactly. I know too much.
All right, so
yes,
I am a student of this topic because, like I say, it was just over a year ago that I started doing this work. I'll give one more sidelight. Susan had been doing it for many years, this women in leadership stuff, and she had worked with a team of all women going in and doing similar trainings, which is why I brought her into the project. And what happened, which is so fascinating, is she then brought me into the training she was doing, previously all women, and then I was the only guy on the training team. But it really changed things, and Susan loved the idea of having a man in the room because it's not a women's issue. It's a we issue from her perspective.
Yeah.
I'm not saying this is right, but I think it's actually accurate because I've gotten so much out of being part of this conversation. So I just wanted to weave that in as well, Carolyn.
Well, you're accepted.
Thank you.
You're part of the club. And it's interesting. I actually, after my stint in the Soviet Union, my first corporate job was at Citibank.
Oh, that's great.
So I joined Citi in 1977 and was there for 10 years doing corporate banking. And those were early days for women on Wall Street.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Really early days. That must have been interesting. It's actually interesting because Sandi and I were talking before the show. I was doing a different program with men and women at a financial institution just yesterday, and one of the men kind of broke down because the whole nature of the program is to help people honestly just come from their heart, be more open, be more authentic, be able to be sort of dimensional and reveal the challenges they're struggling with and so forth. And the world that this man operates in is still very old school. In fact, he was telling stories, and I thought, wow, is this like 1975? One of the heads of this company like has fits and throws things across the room and swears. I'm like, really? This is still going on in a fairly major company in America today. Who knew?
Who knew? But I want to tell you a quick story. In 1977, I joined Citibank, and in the training program met the person who became my first husband. So we were the same age. We both had MBAs from top schools. We both had interesting backgrounds prior to the MBA. His was not as interesting as mine. And
I love that.
We joined, we left the training program, got into the business, and in the first 3 months, he was having really interesting assignments, and I was Xeroxing.
Oh, wow.
And I was really stewing about the fact that I was Xeroxing. So I began to do the calculations of what it was costing the Citibank shareholders for me to Xerox per page. And once I had all my facts, after 3 months of Xeroxing, I marched in to see, at that time, the executive vice president of the company, who was in charge of the international bank where I was, to be able to present him with facts, because I was sure that if he actually knew what it was costing the shareholders to have me Xerox, that they would take me off the Xeroxing. And to Citibank's credit, they did take me off the Xeroxing. But it really took a lot of my courage at the time to try to change the status quo.
Well, the status quo at Citibank has changed tremendously. This diversity initiative is profound, and the work they're doing, and thankfully I get to do, is quite extraordinary. And I'll say we stand on your shoulders. I mean, I think these women at Citibank do, because of the opportunities now and the shift, actually, because there's a book by Hannah Rosen, I don't know if you've read it, called The End of Men, which I felt was very compelling. Recently, the head of all of Latin America who was a man, was replaced. Jane Fraser's now doing that job. You may know her, you may not. But it's so interesting because the soft skills, that's what we call them. And I think for men and women alike, this whole thing of the training I was doing yesterday about coming from your heart and being authentic and so forth isn't that new. It's now been around for at least 10, probably 20 years. And organizations are recognizing, and the facts prove it, that so often when a woman is in charge, the people feel more included. The whole, whether it's a department or an entire organization, does better. At some point we got to get past the better or worse and gender, separation. But at this moment, that's the facts.
Carolyn, I'd like your kind of feedback on this and your expertise on this. I also was breaking the glass ceiling.
You sure were.
The only woman in the men's clothing business for many, many years. And I didn't have any role models for women in business. My role models for success were men. So I put on my Armani suit, I bought my white bucks, never wore high heels, and I pretty much functioned just like I had seen the controlling, dominating men that came before me. Things, of course, have changed. But what are the challenges today for women to be in leadership and bring a particular skill set that they have that's purely feminine? And I don't mean feminine woman, I mean feminine qualities. And also hold a position of respect and being in charge. How are you seeing that change?
Yeah. So let me share a couple thoughts. First of all, one of the interesting things for companies is that the original framework for bringing women and historically underrepresented groups into companies was based on the legislative actions around equal opportunity and equal access, which meant we created systems that were colorblind and genderblind. With this idea that everyone was the same. And we brought a lot of women and historically underrepresented groups into companies. But what we realized is even the most progressive companies, Citibank is one of them. I was a partner for many years at Ernst & Young, where I led our global healthcare business. We were another company that was very progressive. We all found that progress was stalled in getting women up, not in, but up. And that was because we realized we needed a second generation of thinking in terms of policies and practices that actually celebrated the power of difference as opposed to tolerate. Tolerate means to accept with repugnance. So that's sort of no way to build a business or build people's careers. So actually, 11 years ago, I co-founded, along with Sylvia Ann Hewlett, a brilliant international economist, a think tank called the Center for Talent Innovation, which now has 85 global companies, including Citi, who have been funding our research and having a shared conversation around what are the systems and structure things that we have to shift. And a lot of progress has been made, but one of the key recognitions is that part of leadership responsibility is to sponsor people who don't look like you in order to be able to really get the business case of the fact that diverse teams and diverse leaderships do better. The second challenge, so you've got the systems and structure stuff that's got to be sort of focused on. And a lot of companies, even with the best intentions, still have a lot of unconscious bias locked into the system that was, again, built to be gender blind and colorblind.
And it's not just coming from men. I'll throw in here and I'll let you continue. But yesterday we showed a video, and the manager in the video was a woman, and she was using some of the skills that we teach. And after the video, one of the women in the room said, she seems soft to me. Really, this is what she said. And so we had a conversation about it, because I think people still have what you were talking about, Sandi. In order to be the leader, you got to be the guy or gal with the loudest voice. And this was the opposite. And what I loved in the video was the woman wasn't solving the other person's problem. They were allowing them to figure it out on their own. And it was unnerving for a lot of people, where the leader is supposed to have all the answers, which is the opposite, of course, of the training that we do, and I'm sure that you would encourage as well, Carolyn. But so that's another piece, is that people also see a lot of this stuff as weak. They still have the old orientation.
It's what I call the Goldilocks Syndrome. Anyone who's not part of the dominant culture is like to this or to that, never just right.
Yes. Oh, that's so good.
This is why you get the, to this and to that for women. And yes, women and men have those stereotypes. One of the other big issues, and this has been the basis of the course I teach on women in power, is women, for lots of reasons, have an ambivalent relationship with power and ambition. And then if they are totally unambivalent about it, they get all this pushback, right? Because everyone has this point of view of how should women wear power? How do you wear ambition?
Yes.
And navigate the pushback of you're to this or to that.
Now, why don't men get to this or to that? Somehow it seems like we accept all facets of men.
I think that's breaking down.
Not true, Sandi.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
For example, a lot of companies, the leadership archetype is extroversion. So if you're an introvert, you're going to have to really work hard on the to this or to that too.
I see. Yeah.
Except when they look at you, they don't see that you're an introvert. So you can act like an extrovert, and as long as you act well, you don't get the to this or to that.
So there was my gender prejudice coming out in my statement. Yeah, because I see it's my prejudice that men can get away with anything, but women have to be a certain way.
Well, and one of the pieces I think is really important about this is one of the shifts is to the consciousness that no one's winning in this paradigm. So when people are caught in the old stereotypes, first of all, it's not appropriate in the economy and the world we're going into. Like I was saying about the guy who's still yelling and swearing and throwing things around.
Right.
That doesn't function. I think more and more you're going to see that phased out because it just doesn't. In a world where creativity and innovation is required, that kind of behavior shuts everybody down, right? So one of the things I think to weave in here too is right now I think it's great we're doing diversity and we're helping women to step into power and we're teaching them a different way to hold power, and we're their soft skills are more of what the marketplace really wants and requires in a technology and service economy. And there was a couple men yesterday who were kind of breaking down, like, I don't know how to do this. And I kind of raised my hand with them because, again, when in this video where this woman wasn't solving the other person's problem, I was getting uncomfortable because when I would have jumped in and tried to solve the problem, that's a very gender male way of operating. So for me, there's an unwiring that's really required in this new economy. At least that's my perspective.
Well, in fact, one of the things that I like to share with leadership teams is that you actually need 3 operating systems today to really be successful. You need to really know the hardware, the hard stuff. You need to really understand the software, the soft stuff. And you need to be able to really know how to act the heartware, right? The heart stuff. Fred Smith had a great quote, which is, the hard stuff is the easy stuff. It's the soft stuff that's the hard stuff.
I love that.
That's great.
And we think about it. We don't do a lot of training on software, meaning the soft stuff, for men. We certainly don't create a space where you can actually do the heartware and having heart-to-heart real conversations. And then in a lot of the programmatic work around women, we don't do enough of the hard stuff, right? We teach soft skill stuff. How do you negotiate, and how do you show up, and how do you wear power gracefully, et cetera. But we're not really sharing the business acumen stuff that needs to get done, which you tend to learn informally by your relationships with people who have power and learning that, again, favors the dominant culture. So there's hard stuff, soft stuff, and heartware stuff. And those are the 3 operating systems that really do work. If you really want to have authentic leadership and people being able to show up and really be themselves and bring all of what they really know and what they really feel into the workplace.
And I think this idea that it takes time for these new things to come on. As much as I do training, and I think training is fantastic, it's also just the time it takes for the old systems to come apart, right? I think there's a piece, I agree with everything you're saying, that there's these 3 elements, and all 3 have to be sort of balanced, if you will, for the organism to function properly. And that there are imbalances, because there's always going to be some level of imbalance. It's never a perfect balance, but there's this way of recognizing the imbalance and moving in the direction of helping with it. But ultimately, it's kind of the next generation. And I don't know about you guys, but I feel like the millennials, everyone complains about them, but I feel like they're really wired for a new operating system. Personally, I think they really are coming in with more of what I call the new partnering paradigm, where it's not a gender role thing. It's about sharing and more of the soft skills with men and women and so forth. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's the scary thing, and we actually contributed to a front page article in the Times a couple weeks ago on this, is that millennial men, with all the best intentions, when they show up at companies that have traditional cultures, they're conforming to that culture.
Really?
or they leave.
Or they leave. But I don't think that's bad news. I think that the idea that there's an intolerance actually works.
Yeah, but more of them are staying than leaving. So, one of the litmus tests I have for companies, so let's just take a look at the demographics. There's 78 million baby boomers in this country, 35 million Gen Xers, and 80 million millennials. Gen Xers have their head down, focused on being secure, relatively conservative, doing the work the way it used to be done. My litmus test for companies is, are they going to have the Gen X, which are coming into leadership, insist that the baby boomers and the millennials conform to the way Gen X wants to work? Or do companies actually get that they have a huge opportunity to allow the millennial generation to transform their idea of how work works?
It's huge. It's huge.
And then where does the conversation for women fit into that?
So what's interesting, Sandi, is that, and this gets back to the earlier conversation about, if you can really listen to women and really understand what is the environment and the conditions that allow women to be all that they can be, and to recognize that their women's commitment to be leaders at home, at work, and in the world, it will rise. This will be the tide that raises all the boats, because secretly, it's what men would love.
Yes.
And it's certainly what the millennials want.
So I'm going to say it. The three components you talked about, the hard, soft, and the hardware, the women Gen Xers who have made it through all of the quagmire of the way things were, the emerging, all of the changes, operate as role models, right? I feel like they're the transition piece, right? They're the folks that are going to build the bridge so that the establishment that recognizes the old operating system doesn't work, and the young people who really don't want to follow in their parents' footsteps and become workaholics and put their heads down. They want the creative juice, and it's their world anyhow. Look, the younger generation, I hand my technology off to my 10-year-old or my 12-year-old and say, figure it out, because they're just wired. So where the old world was knowledge was passed down, and it still is being passed down, but it's also being passed up, because young people, it's their world. I'm just, and so if I don't have young people in my world, I'm going to fall off, because they're just wired a different way and they get it. So there's the folks in the middle, literally in the middle, the Gen Xers, who have kind of worked this out, who are the conduit. Is that accurate?
I think that is accurate, but don't forget the baby boomers who are, who still stayed on the island.
And they have the purse strings. If we're really honest, they control the purse strings.
They're the ones who have the power.
Yeah,
and they're the ones who now have the positions that can actually reshape things. And so we sort of need everyone. And the men too. Although I get a little concerned when people say, well, I have, some of the baby boomer men who are in positions of power, and they say that, well, I've got daughters, so I really want to do this, because paternalism doesn't help.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true.
That's
we
so
really
smart.
have to be recognized that these incredibly ambitious, wonderful women who are committed to be leaders at home, at work, in the world, don't need paternalism.
No.
They don't need people making assumptions about what they can or can't do, because there's a lot of hidden bias in there about, what's really the right role for a mother. What we need is just to recognize that the power to fuel success is going to come from this younger generation.
I think that business circumstances will ultimately prevail as well. There was a time not long ago where you held a patent and it was good for some number of decades, right? Because it was the new technology and you held the patent, and so that's what the market conformed to. Now, decades, let's talk about weeks. I mean, there's going to be something that's going to come along and blow it out of the water, because that's the nature of the world today. And so, again, this adaptive, creative, innovative requirement especially based on our economy, the old top-down thinking isn't going to get it done. I think ultimately that's what's going to be the major mover. So even though the people with the purse strings are, not apt to give up what has gotten them to where they've gotten to, and honestly, it's kind of worked for them, I think the market pressure will require it, at least in certain segments.
Yes, although you would be amazed at how hard it is for change.
Well, I was amazed to hear the story yesterday of one of the partners in this company still throwing things around and yelling and swearing. I'm like, that's still going on. I was amazed.
Well, let's just look at the numbers. Yesterday, I keynoted at the MedTech Women's Conference, the 5th annual conference of women MedTech executives, and shared some of the results of the research we've recently done on the power of the purse, looking at women in healthcare. 94% of women make the healthcare decisions for themselves, and 60% of women around the world make the healthcare decisions for others.
Like their family.
Their family, their loved ones, their neighbors, their friends, etc. And in the U.S., 90% of actual healthcare decisions, as opposed to the dollars, are made by women.
Wow.
Now, but still only 4% of the CEOs in healthcare companies are women.
Yeah, that's such a crazy miss. How is that happening?
Well, and let me tell you something else. In all of our research, so here you have, 90% of your customers are women.
It doesn't make any sense.
And in all of the research that we did in advance of, in terms of working with healthcare companies prior to getting ready for the research, even though everyone's talking about customer-centered strategies, patient-centered strategies, no one uses the pronoun she when they talk about the patient. Or she when they talk about the caregiver, or she when they talk about the chief health officer, which is actually the person in the family who's making all the healthcare decisions for everybody, which tends to be a woman. So in any other industry, you would think that if 90% of the decisions are made by she, that you would have a face when you said the customer.
Yeah.
So there's still a long way to go. But here's what I'd like to say to all the women who might be listening and the men, which is, if you think about it, 100 years ago in this country, women had an average lifespan of 45, which here's what their life was like. They hit puberty. On average, they had 7 live births, and then they died. Okay. Now, 100 years later, for women who are born today, they're going to live to 100. Our lives and our circumstances and what we want and the way we show up in the world has changed a lot faster than the cultures of the companies and the organizations that we work in. And so it really is up to the women to really get committed to not being ambivalent about power and ambition. All the women I talk to, all the women I teach, they really want to, they're really driven by a desire for meaning and purpose, a desire to flourish, a desire to have challenging work and be recognized in an appropriate way for that, a desire to empower others, and yes, to be paid fairly. But if you want to do all those things, you need to be powerful. Yeah. We've actually done research on women in power called Women Want 5 Things, and what we find is there's a disconnect. Women are very clear that they want these 5 things: to flourish, to excel, meaning and purpose, empowering others, and to get paid fairly. But they don't get that having power gets you those things. They actually think power is a sacrifice, like moving from project leadership to organizational leadership is a cop-out. It's politics. It will take them away from what they want.
It's the direct feedback we get at Banamex. One of the things we ask early on is how many of you equate success with sacrifice, and 90% of the hands go up because they've got that in their heads. And part of what we're unwinding is that it doesn't have to be the case, right? So we're opening up to them, and we've got to talk. Women have to talk
about the joys of power.
Right.
And what power gets you, and that if you want to empower others, you have to be really powerful.
Well, power as empowering, that's where the shift, that's the big hook, because where women see an opportunity to empower others and build community, and be part of solution, a big solution, because we've got big problems as a species, they can get fired up about that. That's my experience.
Yes, they get fired up about that, but they don't get fired up about being intentionally committed to think about all the different ways they can become more powerful themselves first.
Yeah.
In terms of, if you think about all the different currencies of power, it's knowledge, relationships, status, persona, influence, and powerful relationships. So, for example, sponsorship we know is very important, but women confuse who's going to be their sponsor with, if it's a woman, they also want that person to be a role model. Well, that's not the way it works. A sponsor is someone who is very powerful and who will use that power on your behalf. But it doesn't have to be someone whose style that you want to emulate.
Yes, right? Very, very interesting. Yes, that's a great
I'm going to weave a thread in here. Again, I keep bringing up books. Tribal Leadership is one of my favorites, and it talks about common cause, which is really what I think we've got at Banamex, because what's happening with this community of women that have gone through our program is they've really bonded, and they're really supporting each other. And one woman, Florencia is her name, went into HR, wants to do a different way, a different system, more driven by people producing versus butts and seats, right? So she's moving to a flexible work schedule, and she's recreating her entire her part of the organization. And it's firing up the whole community because she's had tremendous success. Immediately, productivity goes up. People are happier. I mean, it's immediate change. But it was a big deal at their institution because they didn't have they actually did in HR have some rules for this, that where it could work, but a lot had to be done to make it happen. But the vision of a new possibility caught fire. And because it wasn't top down, these women weren't told they had to do this program. It was from the Women's Council. They were elected by their peers to be part of the program. They came in and did it and then bonded. They're absolutely killing it. It's beautiful to see. So not dismissing sponsorship, not dismissing the way we see that it could work. I'm just offering, if we can light a fire of a new possibility and the women can build community, and that includes men, because I think the men can feel very included in this leadership mindset, then I wonder what could happen.
Well, I totally agree with you. One of the people who's really influenced me is a woman named Anna Fells, who, a psychiatrist in New York, wrote a book called Necessary Dreams, Women in Ambition. And what she talks about is ambition is the natural fuel to want to accomplish. And it can be easily built or easily extinguished. And it's really just a function of building mastery of skill and being recognized in a positive way for that mastery. Now, when women are not recognized positively for their efforts, then all of a sudden their ambition begins to wane. They stop taking risks, mastery begins to fall, and you have a vicious cycle. On the other hand, if you're recognized positively for your gifts and your mastery, ambition goes up.
Yep.
So here's the thing. I love women's networks because it's women actively seeking out others in a community who will recognize them positively for their commitment, they're willing to take risks, their mastery, their gifts. And what happens too often when we get this Goldilocks Syndrome, she's too this, too that, is women allow the circumstances to create their level of ambition. Meaning when the circumstances are bad and they listen to all that negative recognition and they stop taking risks or they disengage, they're letting the circumstances hurt their ambition. On the other hand, if they can take control themselves, which is I am going to build mastery and I'm going to seek out the people who are going to recognize me for that, it's a beautiful thing, and then they can control this life force that they have, which allows them to be all that they can be.
Beautiful. So beautiful.
It's fantastic.
Carolyn. Yeah. And as you're speaking, I'm just like, I'm seeing worlds crumble. You know, it's more paradigm shift, worlds crumbling and emerging something new. And I feel that it's up to us as women to drive and lead that newness, to find it within themselves, the ambition, the courage, and the compassion, so that others feel safe as worlds crumble and we move into this new territory.
And I think it's up to us as men to find a role as contributors so that we're contributing to the vision and recognizing that it's what we really want. When there was one man in particular who came to me yesterday, and he's burnt out on the yelling and screaming and the battle, and the soft skill stuff is what he desperately wants, but he doesn't know how to do it. And that reach out is so heartwarming and such an indication that this can absolutely happen. And for me personally, I love when women lead because I feel included. A lot of times when guys lead, I feel like we get into ego and it's not fun. So, you know, the joy and the fun, the productivity and the possibilities that come out of what we've been talking about here are so generous. I think it will catch fire. I'm committed to it. So, you know, that's my life. So here we go. We'll see what happens.
I love this. And, you know, one of the words I love is the word courage. You know, it comes from the word heart, kur. And it actually means to move forward with your heart in your mouth at times of doubt, fear, and uncertainty. And, you know, I love your point about the world crumbling, because right now the institutions of today no longer meet the needs of society.
Totally.
Right.
And we have to be able to say it's not enough. The conversation shouldn't be, how do we get more women in? What are the numbers? It should be, for what purpose?
Yes.
It's because we have to make the institutions of today finally meet the needs of society. And so we need everyone, but it requires the courageous journey of men and women to really move forward with their heart in their mouth and be committed to this. And women are going to help lead the way in terms of this heartware stuff. Which is why I'm so optimistic about the future.
Well, we're optimistic and grateful. We're grateful that you spent time with us today, because this has been, for me, it is my conversation, and you are an awesome trailblazer, and I stand on your shoulders, not just the women at Citibank, but I stand on your shoulders as well. So thank you for everything you've done. Before we let you go, I want you to give folks your website so that they can keep track of what you're doing in the world.
Sure. You can go to www.carolynbuckluce.com or Imaginal Labs.
Great. Well, Carolyn, thank you so much. I'm inspired. I'm imagining how I can create a new world from my authenticity of who I really am, and from my heart.
Heartware.
And to be continued, I'm sure. Thank you so much for your time and a wonderful, inspiring conversation.
I love talking to you both. Thanks so much.
And for those of you listening, we invite you to stay tuned, because Sandi and I will be back after these messages to wrap things up here on Cutting Edge Consciousness. Stay with us.
Welcome back to Cutting Edge Consciousness, thought-provoking discussions and bold ideas from the edge of possibility.
And welcome back to Cutting Edge Consciousness, sponsored by Hierophant Publishing, Hampton Roads Publishing, and Insight Events USA. Back with Sandi Stewart. I'm Freeman Michaels. That's my conversation.
So inspiring. You know, I spent so many years of my life banging my head against, rather than imagining how it could be different.
Totally.
And it's so exciting that when all these old paradigms break down, out of the nothingness, something new can emerge. And Carolyn is she's dedicated her life to this, and she's so articulate in this area, and she's such a leader. I really appreciate the courage, the core, the heart, and that it's taken for her to go and, you know.
I love the story from 1970, whatever she had, 9 or whatever she said, where they were having her Xerox, and she's like, okay, how do I approach this? Let's just get logical about it. It doesn't make any sense for them at whatever dollar figure per copy they were paying to have me doing this. That's so smart.
And that's like a very logic and reason kind of idea that you would think would be sort of a masculine way of thinking. But it was but she brought her imagination and creativity to it,
Truly.
which brings it something totally new.
So, look, the imbalance of the disintegrated masculine, which is what all that top-down, command and control, win-lose
And as
mindset
women, we
generates.
own it also.
Of course.
Yeah.
No, listen, the systemic chauvinism is everyone's to own. I mean, we're in it, so we kind of have to first fess up, oh, yeah, I do that, and recognize there's another way and create opportunities to experience more and more of that other way, because once we do, then it becomes more and more embodied. I love working with women. I have trained with many men, and amazing men. No issue. I love it. And I've really enjoyed working with women. I feel really seen, and I feel like the complementary part of the relationship. Like, I feel complimented, literally, because I get a lot of positive feedback, but also just the fun. It's just funner for me. I don't know. I don't want to go into a big analysis of it, but I've really enjoyed working with Susan. I love being here with you, and it's no discredit to all the men. I love them too, and it's great. But
it's another quality.
Yeah.
And it opens up a quality in you that you're birthing. What the men provide, you have different aspects. Of course, they have different expertise and whatever, and they bring it to you. But the energy, the structure, you have that down. It's in your DNA.
Yeah.
Women are bringing another piece of you that, so far has maybe been more asleep, because societally it has had to be asleep.
Yeah.
And as it awakens, just how good it feels.
It feels good
to have
for
that
everyone.
in balance.
Yeah, it feels good for the women too.
Of
And one of the big pieces of this puzzle, because part of the chauvinism is men sexualize women and vice versa. But I mean, it's really oppressive for both parties. Again, the perception is, men objectifying women is for their sake and they get something out of it. It's no fun. I want to relate to people. I don't want the pressure of that, And so to be able to peel that away and see women's souls, not just their bodies. It's not like I'm ignoring their bodies. I'm a heterosexual man and I see the
appreciating beauty.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong
artists.
with that. But I'm more concerned with, or more oriented towards, seeing them as human beings and so forth and so on. And that's a very exciting prospect for the future. Because as a parent, the over-sexualizing and the objectifying, not for any moral reason, but from a standpoint of the humanizing. It's so dehumanizing, I get it sells records and it sells product, but it ain't it. And so the maturity...
It's painful.
It's painful.
It's actually painful.
That's the truth.
It is painful. It really is painful. And as a woman, when I work with men who have embraced their feminine side, for lack of anything else, it creates such a safety for me.
Yes.
And such a place where I can feel safe to express my feminine side, which I've kept under wraps because of not wanting to be judged. And then we come from heart and head together.
It's beautiful.
And we do that dance back and forth. And what emerges is something so new. And when I'm working with a guy who's like neck up and everything else is dead, I'm dead. I'm uninspired.
Totally.
I'm bored. I become manipulative. I use my feminine wares to get what I need because I know I can't get to him any other way. The only thing that's alive is between his legs and his brain, and everything else is dead, and it's just so boring and so old.
It is
and
boring.
I become somebody who I don't like.
Yeah. It's so good. I mean, this is the gift to our sons and daughters. And again, both. The whole idea that men are getting away with something. They're not. There's no gift. There's no joy in this. It stinks.
They go home and have their drink, and they're more stressed and
asleep and shut down, to harken back to last week's show. Yeah, we talked about this. Asleep and caught in the patterns. And because the consensus world is saying, hey, you're successful because you have the money or whatever, it doesn't feel that way. I mean, the crazy part of asleep is, because I've been asleep in my life, is you talk yourself into and you surround yourself with people who say, hey, you're doing great. But there's always imbalances.
There's that pain.
It's a pain.
There's a real body feeling pain that is, and it's crazy making because you can't really explain it.
No.
On the outside, there's no reason for this pain. So it's like when you're abused but you're not beaten.
Yes.
And it's much easier when you're beaten.
Yes, it's much easier to point to it.
Yeah,
for sure.
But when you're sort of emotionally not attuned to, and it doesn't feel good, pre-verbally, it's hard to put your finger on
Totally.
it.
So use that analogy, when the parent is doing everything quote unquote right.
Baking the cookies but not looking you in the eye.
Exactly. It's very subtle. It's hard to point out.
And it's hard, and you think it's you.
You do.
And so you walk around, all these people walking around thinking, there's something wrong with me. I can't get it. I don't feel it. And you've just bought into the lie.
Well, and if you've gone to the addictive stuff because that's the way you're numbing or getting your hit or whatever it is, that's a tricky one. I mean, if that's all you got is you just keep going to it, it's just really hard. It honestly requires a breakdown.
It does.
It does. I mean, something's got to give.
Because it looked like it has worked.
That's right.
And so
this guy yesterday was breaking down. He came to me and he was like,
beautiful.
It was so beautiful. It was so beautiful. Like his eyes were watery. He was saying, I got to do something different.
The strength in that vulnerability.
You know what he said? Actually, he said it's for my kids. I mean, again, we kind of talked about you can't do it for your kids and it's parental. Paternal. I get that, and that's all true. And I think it's for him, but he recognizes that what he's handing his kids isn't the world he wants them to inherit.
And I would say that he's doing it for his kid.
Oh, that's so smart. I totally agree with you.
It's easier to say, I'm doing it for those kids.
Yeah, let's project onto
his inner child kid needs something, and he needs to do it to bring that child back to life and alive.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's so good. And I'm so grateful that we've had the opportunity today to do this.
Yes, this is so fun. I must say, I woke up a little jet lagged thinking, oh my God, I've got to drive here. I'm not sure. I loved the guest, but I just didn't know how much energy I would bring to show up. And once we started talking with our guests, the energy just flies. Feels so much better to be awake even when I'm tired than to be asleep when I'm tired. So I'm so grateful to both Lise and Janelle, and Carolyn, and to you, and for this wonderful opportunity.
And we're grateful that all of you tune in, and we invite you to check out our full library of shows because we've had amazing guests, and there will be more. So stay tuned, keep tuning in, keep finding more and more of our stuff out there. Go to cuttingedgeconscious.com, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.